Hey there, guys. This is Cole. Welcome back to another movie review. This is it's gonna be the last movie review for a few days at least because, see, I got plans and I'm gonna be busy these next few days, so you won't really see a video. And I know it's been like I think like 5 days at this rate since I reviewed The Untouchables. But anyways. Today I'm going to be doing my next movie review, and I decided to review a classic science fiction movie from the 1970s that is currently free on YouTube with ads. And as you can tell by the title of today's movie, I'm going to be reviewing the 1973 movie Soylent Green, starring Charlton Heston. Now, a couple of things to state. No, I do not own this movie on DVD, but I would like to get it someday. And secondly, there will be spoilers for those who have not seen this movie. So if you do not want spoilers, then click off this review now and go watch it. If you do not want your experience spoiled, because like I said, it is free on YouTube with ads. But anyways, so what is the plot and the story to the 1973 film Soylent Green? Well, the plot of the movie is as follows. Soylent Green is a 1973 dystopian sci-fi thriller movie starring Charlton Heston as Detective Thorne, investigating the murder of a wealthy executive in a future New York City of 2022. The film is set in a world of overpopulation, pollution, and resource depletion where the masses are fed a synthetic food called Soylent Green. The investigation uncovers the horrifying secret behind the food's ingredients, leading to one of cinema's most famous and shocking final lines and plot twists in general. But anyways, how was this movie made? Well, in 1972, in December of 1972, MGM Studios hired Richard Fleischer to direct a movie adaptation of the 1966 novel Make Room, Make Room by Harry Harrison. And due to the success that Richard Fleischer had directing the 1966 sci-fi movie Fantastic Voyage for 20th Century Fox, which I actually have not yet seen that movie, but I've heard really good things about it, because of how successful that movie was, by 20th Century Fox, another studio wanted to hire him, and so the director of that movie was hired to direct this one. And when this movie was released to the general public on May 9th of 1973, it received positive reviews from critics and audiences and was a huge success at the box office, making $20 million worldwide on a $4 million budget. And the movie was praised for its story and its shocking twist at the end. Now, as for my reaction to the movie, I watched this movie for the very first time in 2024 when one of my mom's friends, Kim, let me borrow like a 4-movie DVD collection that came with classic sci-fi movies, and this was in there. Liked it then, and I still like it now, which, like I said, I don't own this, because obviously if you borrow something, you gotta get it back, so I did give it back to Kim, but I would like to buy this movie for myself on DVD someday, because I really like this movie, and I recently rewatched it because it was free on YouTube with ads. But anyways, let's get into my review. And one thing I will say I do really like about this movie is the opening credits, where the movie starts off where there's opening credits that are showing overpopulation and pollution over the span of decades in only 2 minutes. And the reason I like this title, this opening the opening credits so much, is mainly due to the music and the background pictures we see and the way it's overall filmed. Now, Richard Fleischer, I have not seen any of this guy's movies besides this. Again, I know he did Fantastic Voyage from the 60s, which I've not yet seen, but I heard good things about it. And then he would go on to direct the 1984 movie Conan the Destroyer, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is the sequel to the 1982 movie Conan the Barbarian. Now, I have not yet seen Conan the Destroyer, but I did see the first Conan the Barbarian movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger from the 80s, and I did really like the first movie, but I'm getting off track here. The point I'm making is that Richard Fleischer did a great job directing this movie, but let's get back to it. Then we cut to present day New York City in 2022, and we then cut to present day in New York City in 2022, and we learn the city is overpopulated with 40 million people. We then cut to our main character of the movie, Detective Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, who is a police detective, and Detective Thorne is watching the news on the TV in the apartment, and the TV says these exact words. The announcer on the TV says, "This conversation with Governor Henry C. Santini is brought to you by Soylent Red, Soylent Yellow, High Energy Concentrates, and the new delicious Soylent Green, the miracle food of high energy plankton gathered from the oceans of the world. Because of its enormous popularity, Soylent Green is in short supply. Remember, Tuesday is Soylent Green Day." We are then introduced to Sol Roth, played by Edward G. Robinson in his final film role, who is a good friend to Detective Thorne. And Sol turns off the TV and says BS. And one thing I will say I do like about this movie, I thought that Detective Thorne and Sol Roth were really great characters. You definitely bought them as friends. And so Detective Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, offers Sol some Soylent Green, but Sol says he finished it last night. And Detective Thorne says he'll get some more on Tuesday, and then Sol says, "You do that. I don't want to get caught in another riot." We are then introduced to Cheryl, played by Lee Taylor-Young, who is the romantic interest in the main character of the movie, Detective Thorne, played by Charlton Heston. And again, like I said, this is a very well-directed movie by Richard Fleischer. And later that night, a person breaks into the Soylent Green factory, and the guy who broke into the building goes into the apartment room of Mr. Simonson, the father of Cheryl, and I like the part when the intruder asks, "This is right?" where the intruder is asking, "This is right?" And then Mr. Simon says, "No, not right. Necessary to God." Like that was a good quote right there. And then the intruder strikes Mr. Simonson on the head. We then cut to Detective Thorne, who meets up with Charles, and they discuss the possibility of who might have been responsible for the death of Mr. Simonson, who is a Richie, who is a wealthy rich person, executive in New York City. Detective Thorne asks a few questions to Mr. Simonson's bodyguard, who knew him personally, but no one knows for sure who's responsible. And then Detective Thorne asks, "Where were you, bodyguard, when your friend was getting slaughtered?" And then Mr. Simonson's bodyguard says, he says, "I was out shopping with Cheryl." And later that night, Detective Thorne asks Cheryl a few questions about the case. He believes that Cheryl is telling the truth, that she is not sure who did the crime, who was responsible for her father's death. So then the main character, Detective Thorne, heads home. And Detective Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, shows back up home and visits Sol and gives him beef, meat, and pencils. The next day, Detective Thorne goes into the police chief's office. He goes into the lieutenant's office because, like I said, the main character is a police detective, and there's the lieutenant who's basically in charge of the police building. And the lieutenant asks who did the inside work, and Detective Thorne says, "I think it was the bodyguard." And one thing I will say I do like about this movie, throughout the course of the movie, we see how much of a mess New York City is with its extreme overpopulation, pollution, and trashed up streets. And Detective Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, then goes inside a building and says to a bodyguard, "Thorne, 14th Precinct." The bodyguard then says, "We run a clean building." then Thorne says, and Detective Thorne says he wants to see Tab feeling, and he goes to the second floor on the right as instructed by the bodyguard. And Detective Thorne asks Tab a few questions, then leaves. Later that day, Thorne eats dinner with Soul using silverware, and I do like that scene where they're eating dinner together, where you can tell that that Detective Thorne and Soul, like, they enjoy each other's company. And I like this scene mainly due to the classical music, mainly due to the music that's in this scene. And in this scene, they eat Soylent Green and the apples in that scene. And so, yeah. Later that night, Detective Thorne calls the lieutenant and says, Mr. Simonson was a director of Soylent Green, and right now, someone is tailing me, and they're really good at it. And the lieutenant says, report in my office first thing in the morning, and then Thorne agrees, and then he hangs up the phone. And the next day, Detective Thorne shows up to Cheryl's apartment to ask her a few questions. He sees she invited some friends, so then Detective Thorne asks Cheryl if Mr. Simonson had any friends, and she's only able to remember a few, and she tells Detective Thorne that the people didn't visit him that often. And I will say, one thing I do really like about this movie is how Cheryl and Thorne decide to date each other while investigating the case throughout the whole movie. I thought that aspect of the script was really good, and again, that's because both the actors did a really good job playing the characters. And I will say, this movie is not afraid to get dark in certain areas. I mean, at the 51-minute mark of the movie, a little girl is outside, and this little girl sees that her mom is dead, and reasonably so, she starts crying and screaming mommy. So then Detective Thorne brings her inside the church where the little girl was outside, and brings her to a nun. And then Detective Thorne asks a person a few questions, and then he leaves when he doesn't get the answers he's looking for. And then Detective Thorne is then in the lieutenant's office, and then we cut to a scene where Detective Thorne is in the lieutenant's office, and he says, he says to the lieutenant, I told you there's been a tail on me. Something stinks here. A member of the board of directors of the Soylent Corporation was torn apart with a meat hook. You can't sweep that under the rug. Who brought you? And the lieutenants and the police lieutenants and the police chief, aka the lieutenant, says, he responds to him and he says, you're brought as soon as they pay you a salary. Hi. And Detective Thorne says, who is that? By who? And then he says, the lieutenant doesn't answer him, but he doesn't give him the right answer. And then he says, high and hot, and they want this case permanently closed. And they want this case permanently closed their way. Now sign the paper. But then Detective Thorne refuses, and he leaves the office. And what I really like about this scene is how this movie, I will say, if any of you guys have never seen this movie and you don't know what it's about and you're watching it for the first time, like, you guys got to admit, be honest, guys, do you think, do any of you guys think that it's a little weird that a police detective is trying to figure out who killed someone, but then these people want him to sign papers to close the case permanently? That's what I like about this movie, because throughout the course of the movie, this movie has a mystery on top of it, but it's you can clearly tell that something's off, but you're trying to piece together what it is throughout the movie if you're watching it for the first time. That's what I think this movie does a great job at. And not long after that scene, we cut to a scene of two people who discuss the fact that Detective Thorne refuses to close the case. So basically, bad guys who work at the Soylent Green Corporation are basically after Detective Thorne, trying they're basically after Detective Thorne, trying to eliminate him so Detective Thorne cannot get any information out to anyone once he finds out the truth. So they do not want him to know the truth. Not long after that scene, we cut to a scene on a Tuesday where a violent riot breaks out in the street as the police as a couple of police detectives tell people there is no more Soylent Green, and people are saying no more Soylent Green. Soylent Green is Wednesday day, and people get angry and riots start happening. Then garbage trucks on the 14th precinct pick up people off the ground to spot the riots. Later that night, Soul meets older women. Soul meets older women in a library, and he tells them that he is trying to uncover the case of Mr. Simonson, and then they say, we need full proof first before we bring it to the console. And then at the 1 hour and 11-minute mark of the movie, Soul goes to Theater 2, which he pays for, and he lays on this really comfy looking bed with very light classical music alone in the room. Then he watches footage of flowers moving, and Detective Thorne shows up, but he demands to see Soul, and the worker says that that's prohibited during the process, but Detective Thorne points a gun at the employee and demands to see Soul, so the employee agrees, and then Detective Thorne is able to speak to Soul with headphones, and Soul says, thanks Detective Thorne for coming. And he says to Thorne, I love you, Thorne, and then peacefully passes away in the bed. But before he passes away, he says to Detective Thorne, you have to prove it, Thorne. Go to the exchange. Please, Thorne. And I will say, that is a very emotional scene, because Soul was a good character. And what makes that scene emotional in particular is that the actor who played Soul, Edward G. Robinson, actually passed away only a few months after this movie was released. And then we cut to a scene where Detective Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, he sneaks close to the Soylent factory, and he sneaks to the Soylent Green factory, and he sees what looks like dead human bodies in bags being put in garbage trucks, but he runs behind a garbage truck when no one is looking and climbs on top of it, which brings him to the Soylent Green factory. He sneaks into the building. And he notices that something is very off. And, of course, Detective Thorne, he is spotted by two employees, and the two employees decide to chase after Detective Thorne, and Thorne fights them off. And Detective Thorne escapes the factory, and he calls Cheryl. And Thorne says, just live away from me and stay away. And the police chief, the lieutenant named Hatcher, calls asking Thorne where he is, and then Thorne tells him that he's at the exchange, and he decides to ask for Hatcher's help as Detective Thorne sees people are following him, and Detective Thorne knows that these people have guns, so he shoots at the people, and then Detective Thorne runs into the church hiding, and one of the people who is after Thorne enters the building quietly, and not Detective Thorne, but one of the bad guys who was after Detective Thorne accidentally shoots up a woman, making everyone scream and wake up who were sleeping, and Detective Thorne is fighting, in fact, Mr. Simonson's bodyguard, who was in on the whole thing without us knowing, because, again, this guy is trying to get rid of Detective Thorne, and Detective Thorne is able to defeat the bad guy. Then more of these cops show up, and the priest says, there is another one over there, and then Police Chief Lieutenant Hatcher decides to ask Thorne if he's with us, and then Detective Thorne says these exact words to Hatcher. Hatcher, go to the exchange. You have got to tell them they are right. I have proof. They need proof. I have seen it. I have seen it happening. You have got to tell people too. The ocean is dying. Plankton is dying. It is people. Soylent Green is made out. And then of course, this is the most iconic twist of the movie where the detective played by Charlton Heston says the ocean is dying, plankton is dying. It is people. Soylent Green is made out of people. And then Detective Thorne is placed on a medical carrying bed, and Detective Thorne yells at the top of his lungs, and Detective Thorne yells at the top of his lungs, they are making our food out of people. The next thing they'll be breeding us like cattle for food. You've got to tell them. You've got to tell them. You've got to tell everyone. You listen to me, Hatcher. You've got to tell them. Soylent Green is people. We've got to stop them somehow. So yeah, very dark twist at the end of this movie. And funny story, I actually showed this movie to my mom. I actually showed this movie to my mom and my stepdad the other night, who had never seen this movie before, and they both really liked it. They thought that this was a good movie, and that twist did shock my mom at the end. And I'll be honest, that twist did shock me too the first time I watched this. But yeah, at the end of the day, Soylent Green from 1973 is a great sci-fi thriller movie. And just, yeah, really good movie on the whole front. And now, to be perfectly honest, this movie is a fantastic movie, but coming from someone who is a big fan of this movie, only if, and I'm saying this, only if they do it right. I actually would be okay if this movie were to get a remake. And the reason I think, now, do not get me wrong, this is a fantastic movie, but the reason I think this movie could benefit from a remake is because there are so many themes in this movie that are relevant to today, like, you know, riots and overpopulation and pollution, like themes that are all relevant to today. And another thing, of course, the whole thing, and of course, the plot twist at the end of this movie is a very well-known plot twist. Like, that is why this movie is primed for a remake, because of its social commentary and the themes in this movie that are very relevant to today. In fact, I would actually like to see a remake of this, but have it be directed by, I don't know, like, maybe David Fincher or even Neil Blomkamp. I think that'd be pretty cool, but yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my review on Soylent Green, and on a scale of 1 to 10, I am going to give Soylent Green a 9 out of 10. So, yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my review of Soylent Green, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye now.